So I want to start off by talking about what my grade is for the Cowboys in this draft. I think that the Cowboys deserve a B plus at minimum for what they did over the draft, just because Caleb Downs. Like, if you get Caleb Downs, you automatically get a B. Even if you flop on the rest of your picks, I feel like you at least get a B because you add a guy who might end up being the best player in this draft, right? Now, I obviously don't want the Cowboys to flop on the rest of their picks. I think that they made some really intriguing picks, right? Malachi Lawrence is a guy that is exactly what the Cowboys needed. Now, we'll see what his role is going to be for this year and in the upcoming years, right? Maybe Malachi Lawrence is a guy that he's just a situational pass rusher this year, and they want to develop him as a run defender, have him be better at setting an edge, and that's completely fine. And then you look at what they did with Jayshon Barham in the third round. I think if you're going to play him as an off-ball linebacker, I think that that is a guy that can contribute day one for you. Yeah, he might not be a star, but do I think he could be a good player for you? Absolutely. And when you look at the future of the linebacker position for the Cowboys, like, we're going to talk about the trade for D. Winters. Like, the Cowboys were so bad at linebacker going into this draft that they needed to add multiple bodies to it. I still think they need to add another body to this room, to be 100% honest with you. And I think a guy who can legitimately play for you. Maybe Jordan Brooks is a guy that they end up trading. I think that come June 2nd, I think that that's a trade that the Cowboys are absolutely going to explore, because if I'm not mistaken, I think that would actually save the Dolphins more money on their cap. Now, granted, I don't really think they care about their cap this upcoming season because of the way their team is constructed at the current moment. They're not going to win many games next year. But that's besides the point. You add a linebacker in Jayshon Barham, who I think is going to contribute for you. You added D. Winters, a guy that right now would be your starter. Like, you can line up and legitimately play with your linebacker room. Still think you need to add another body just because of the fact that I don't know if DeMarvion Overshown's going to be here, especially after the news that he's hiring David Mulugheta to be his agent. I don't know, because David Mulugheta gets the best for his clients. And I could see the Cowboys saying, dude, you played 19 games for us so far in your career. I don't know. But, obviously that's something for this time next year that we're going to be discussing. But they go into the fourth round. They had 3 fourth-round picks, and they added Drew Shelton, the offensive tackle from Penn State. I didn't love that pick. Like, it's kind of just like whatever, right? But, they still had 2 other fourth-round picks. They added Devin Moore from Florida, cornerback that has some real potential there. They added LT Overton, a guy who, like, I feel very good about LT Overton. I think that he's going to be a guy that's going to contribute for this football team. I think we're going to look back at that pick, and, like, I don't think he's going to be a star. Understand what I'm saying when I say this. I don't think he's going to be a star. He's going to be a guy that can contribute for you, because I think what he's going to do is I think they're going to try and put some weight on him. I think they're going to try and get about 10 more pounds on him. And what they're going to do is when they play their 5-man fronts, when they're in their 3-4, they're going to play him as, that defensive end, the 4-eye, which is something that's like a buzzword with the Cowboys community this year. I think that's what they're going to do. And then when they're in their nickel, they're going to play him at the edge. That's a guy who, Mike McDonald talked about, you want to have a defensive line that can win with 4 and stop the run with 4. That's a guy, if you put him as your edge, he's going to help you stop the run. He's not going to give you much as a pass rusher, which is why he dropped. But in the fourth round, adding what you would consider a run-stopping defensive end, that makes a lot of sense. I have a problem when, teams add defensive ends that are just primarily run stoppers in, like, the second round, which is what the Cowboys have done in the past. Like, to me, you can find good run stopping defensive ends in the third, the fourth round. You don't need to spend a top 60 pick on that. But I love that they drafted him in the fourth round. And it's not even just the players that they drafted. It's the players that they signed in undrafted free agency. I think Michael Trigg is going to compete for a roster spot and could be a contributor day one for this football team. They could find a role for him. Would it surprise me in a year or two from now that Michael Trigg is the best tight end on this football team? No. He has that type of talent. He is a guy that he's going to be your receiving tight end. I think that if the future of your tight end room is Michael Trigg and Brevin Spanford, because I'm just going to be transparent with you guys, I'm not high on Jake Ferguson. I think Jake Ferguson this past year, it was a disappointment from him. It was a disappointing year from Jake Ferguson this past season. And that's the way I look at it, right? Like, Jake Ferguson has not played at a really high level, in my personal opinion, since the 2023 season. So I think you have to be looking at potential contingency plans. And if a year from now, we're looking at this tight end room and we're saying it's Michael Trigg and it's Brevin Spanford, that's a nice combination of tight ends there, right? Like, you have a guy who blocks at a really high level with Brevin Spanford, and then you have a guy who you think could be a really good receiving tight end. And Brevin Spanford, I think there's some untapped potential there. Would it surprise me if Brevin Spanford is the best tight end on this football team this upcoming season? No, it wouldn't. As a matter of fact, I was at the Star the other day. I was in the locker room. There was one player in the locker room. One. Brevin Spanford. Brevin Spanford was the only one in the locker room putting in that work, right? Like, now, obviously, I'm not saying that other players on the team aren't putting in that work. You know, some of these guys have facilities at their own place that are better than what the Cowboys have, right? But I'm just saying, like, a guy like Brevin Spanford, he does not have Dak and CeeDee Lamb money, right? He's not putting a gigantic gym in his apartment or his house, whatever he has. He's going to the facility and he's putting in that work. I appreciate that. But, you know, that's besides the point. Now we're going off on a completely different topic. But, you know, Michael Trigg, I just think that's such an underrated signing. I think that's such a good signing. Brian and Vach, right? They broke down Michael Trigg. Vach had a third on him. Brian had a fourth on him. Like, that's the type of player he is. The fact that they were able to get him in undrafted free agency is huge. And, you know, like, the Cowboys have done really good in undrafted free agency recently. Like, you look at some of the players that they've gotten, they have gotten contributions from these players. And I think a large part of that is where the Cowboys are, right? Like, they're in Texas. And because, like, when you're an undrafted free agent, you can decide where you want to go. So there's a lot of guys that decide, hey, I want to go to the Cowboys because they're not really active in free agency. They'll absolutely give me a chance. If you're an undrafted free agent, they'll give you a chance. They're going to give you an opportunity to make a name for yourself. But on top of that, like, you want to play close to home, and Texas has the best football teams in the entire country. Like, when you look at the colleges they have in that state, do they have the best team in the country? No, they don't. In that state, no, they don't. But they have so many colleges in there, in the state, and so many people want to stay and play in Texas. So that's why I think they do pretty damn well in undrafted free agency, and they're also the Dallas Cowboys, right? But I think they did a very good job building this roster. Now, what is this draft going to look like? Am I saying A+? No. They had an A+ first pick, no doubt about it. They had an A+ first pick. The second pick at pick 23, Malachi Lawrence, we'll see what happens with that. But I think they made an A+ move, trading back with the Eagles, getting 2 fourth-round draft picks. Because here's the thing, right? I kind of hate the way people look at this, because they only look at it like, I feel like not enough people look at it the way they should. So to the fan bases around the NFL and the media around the NFL, they're looking and they're like, the Cowboys made a trade with the Eagles and they allowed him to get Malachi Lemon. But, like, the Cowboys are looking at this and they're saying, hey, we're able to get 2 really good players, or what they think are going to be 2 really good players in the 4th round. We're able to add quantity to our team and draft a player we wanted to draft anyway. They were going to draft Malachi Lawrence at pick 20 anyway. So they looked at it and they said, hey, like, we have a chance to still go get our guy, but also add 2 first-round or 2 fourth-round draft picks to our draft capital arsenal. So it made a lot of sense for them. So it was a fair trade for both sides. The Cowboys traded back, got the guy that they were going to get anyway, and they got multiple 4th-round draft picks as well. Good for them. Good for them. Now, what Malachi Lawrence turns out to be, we'll see. I'm not as sure about Malachi Lawrence as I am about Caleb Downs. Do I think Malachi Lawrence could be great? He can be. You know, and then the 3rd-round pick, Jayshon Barham, I think that's an A+ 3rd-round grade. Or the 3rd-round pick, to be 100% honest with you guys. Where they got him at 92, that's an A+. Then you look at some of the other guys. Drew Shelton, okay. Moore from Florida, I think that could be something that really works out for the Cowboys. LT Overton, he's not going to be a superstar in the league, but he's going to be a really good contributor for your football team. He plays a role. And then in undrafted free agency, you get Michael Trigg, Jordan Hudson, another guy, wide receiver from SMU. They got a really nice haul here of players. So, I mean, I'd give it a B plus, A minus. I would have loved to have seen them add another running back to their team. But hey, look, the game's going to be the game. They improved their defense, no doubt about it. This is the type of draft that they needed. They added so many players to their team through this draft.